Today, I received a comment on two of my videos on the opioid crisis, the other side of it, the people who suffer because the medical community and the CDC have really thrown us under the bus. And this story is heartbreaking, but it's one of thousands and perhaps millions across the nation, across the world, of people like you and I who are forced to suffer because of the illegal activities of others. And I hope I say this right, Fuqua'S commented on two of the videos, as I said, and she sent to me some material that she had written and gave me permission to share the material with you. And the first is an article that appeared in the Washington Post, and it's titled, "The Other Opioid Crisis, Pain Patients Who Can't Access the Medicine Needed. Changing Guidelines for Prescriptions Have Left People Like Me Without Care." By the way, Anne Fuqua'S is a former nurse living in Birmingham, Alabama. And now I quote, "When you hear the words opiate crisis, you probably think about tragic deaths from addiction, but there is another opioid crisis, one I know well. The inability of pain patients to access the medication they need in order to function. I was diagnosed with primary generalized dystonia in my late teens. It's a neurological disorder that causes involuntary movements and painful muscle spasms. I was unable to tolerate most of the medications used to treat Parkinson's disease, which are commonly used against dystonia. The ones I could tolerate didn't help. But for reasons doctors don't fully understand, opioids have a dramatic effect on my symptoms. My body is not nearly as rigid and jerky. The spasms that pulled my body to one side, making it difficult to sit up straight, are gone. My fingers are no longer clenched. But my situation has gotten more complicated. At first, it was small things. In 2014, my doctor started requiring more frequent appointments to keep writing my prescriptions, and I didn't mind. Next, my doctor decided to no longer participate in my insurance. It cost me $150 out of pocket for each visit, but it was worth it to be able to continue the life I had worked so hard to build. In 2015, the state of Alabama began sending mandatory prescription monitoring reports to physicians who prescribe patients high doses of opioids, along with a form letter encouraging the doctors to carefully consider whether their patients should be receiving this dose. Now, my doctor, who had treated me for 9 years, was apologetic. I could see the sadness in his expression as he explained that he would need to reduce my dose. That first reduction was small, and I tolerated it easily. The second reduction, however, brought the return of pain and several of my dystonia symptoms, problems I had not dealt with in years. And my doctor was distressed, and he decided to put me back on my original dose. My relief was short-lived. A few months later, my doctor chose to leave pain management. He told me he could no longer stand the paperwork and stress involved with being a pain specialist and trying to decide between protecting his ability to provide for his family and protecting his patients. What followed was the hardest time of my entire life. I had to taper my medication while searching for a new doctor. I became completely debilitated and could barely manage on my own. Pain and spasms fed on each other, creating a vicious cycle. Moving from one chair to another was once again a very difficult task. I could no longer drive the van I had worked so hard to purchase. I had my records sent to many doctors across Alabama. Some of my contacts in the medical community reached out to doctors on my behalf. No one was even willing to evaluate me. When the Center for Disease Control and Prevention introduced guidelines for opioid prescribing in 2016, doctors began treating pain patients differently. It didn't matter if a patient had been stable and benefiting from medication for many years. Doctors pulled back. I was able to find a doctor out of state who was willing to treat me, but many patients have not been so lucky. In 2014, I started keeping a list of pain patients who had committed suicide, unable to cope with pain. Sometimes the list grows weekly, sometimes daily. I knew some of these people personally. Some names were submitted to me by their loved ones. Others were mentioned in the comment sections of articles or posted on Facebook, and sometimes it's not even a full name. My list has more than 100 entries. Children have lost mothers, fathers, and grandparents, and I've lost friends. Just a few years ago, discussion of suicide was rare in the community of pain patients, and now I see it on online bulletin boards, in articles comments and in online groups dedicated to the subject. That's my opioid crisis. As a former nurse, I never dreamed that our government would encroach to this degree on the relationship patients have with their medical providers. 20 years ago, when I was attending nursing school, the Joint Commission, a healthcare accreditation board, introduced the fifth vital sign, which required healthcare providers to ask patients, which they had, about their pain and how severe it was as part of the routine assessment of vital signs. Now we've done an about face because of opioid abuse to implement policies that will cause physicians to abandon patients or taper medications, regardless of whether this will harm their quality of life. Would love to return to working as a nurse, though I can't imagine doing it now. I used to work for a hospice service. I don't want to tell a patient writhing in pain at 4 a.m. that he will have to find a way to cope because prescribing policy changes now affect patients with cancer and those who have just had surgery. My opioid crisis is wondering whether each time I fill my medication will be the last time. And I wonder how much longer I'll be able to do the things I enjoy. I'm 38 years old. There's so much that I want to do with my life. I want to go back to work part-time, but I'm afraid to because my future is so uncertain. I feel like I'm on death row. There are multiple opioid crises in America. The crisis of people in the throes of addiction deserves time, attention, and talents of healthcare providers and legislatures. But the crisis of people in pain deserve the same, end quote. Now, this dear lady also shared a letter with me that she wrote that I would like to read to you. This letter was written to board members of the Medical Association of the state of Alabama, and it requests to the MASA board members for assistance from a patient struggling to find needed treatment. And the letter goes, and I quote, "I am requesting your assistance as a last resort for the severe difficulties I'm having locating a physician to manage the medication I have taken for many years. These medications have allowed me to live independently and have a good quality of life. I've been a patient of a responsible and knowledgeable physician since February 2007, but he changed the scope of his practice, and this with very short notice, and has not been able to help me find another physician to maintain my current successful program. I have always been conflicted about using opioids due to the values instilled in me as a child. For example, after bilateral deterioration osmosis at age 13 that resulted in MRSA, osteomyelitis, and wound complications, I received only ibuprofen and a few doses of ketorolac. I'm not a person who simply cannot tolerate pain. I have primary generalized dystonia of non-DYT1/DYT2 origin. Multiple blood relatives, including my father, have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I've tried many therapies over the past 15 years. An intrathecal, friends, listen, I'm going to have trouble pronouncing some of these words. This is Dennis. I meant to say end quote, so bear with me. All right, back to the article, or the letter, excuse me. Inserted at the age of 18 caused complications leading to an atonic bladder, chronic CSF leak, neuropathic pain, and actual spasticity and plantar flexion. Medication trials have included baclofen, tizanidine, dantrolene. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to be able to try some of these. But to continue on, by a compassionate use protocol, most were helpful to some degree during sustained trials of high doses. However, many had side effects that were intolerable, including elevated liver enzymes and osteostatic hypotension. After taking opioids for years, I was opioid-free by choice in 6 months preceding my appointment with my most recent physician. I was in the worst shape of my entire life, reliant on a power wheelchair, losing weight rapidly with severe rigidity and intermittent episodes of myoclonitis, unable to sit without support, with clenched fingers that rendered my hands useless. The comparison in my quality of life with and without opioids made one thing very clear. Although prescribed for pain, the opioids, by whatever mechanism, had a primary and significant effect on my dystonia. Within an hour of my resuming OxyContin, I experienced a noticeable improvement. Over the years, my dose has increased back to my prior levels. Each increase has produced sustained visible improvement in my dystonia and quality of life without intolerable side effects. I understand my dosing regime, high-dose oxycodone and fentanyl, makes me an outlier in the scheme of medical board recommendations. I am no longer a prisoner in my own home. I started coaching youth sports for inner city children from Woodlawn, which is adjacent to Crestwood where I reside. I began playing wheelchair soccer for Lakeshore Foundation. I traveled with teams that practiced twice weekly with frequent road trips in a 9-month season. And getting to practice via the bus took most of the day. This was exhausting, but I absolutely loved it. Eventually, I was physically able to drive and saved the money to purchase an adapted minivan. The independence means the world to me. It is central to who I am and has made an incredible difference in my life. All of this would have been utterly impossible without medication. My undergraduate degree was in nursing, and I was over halfway through a nurse practitioner program when medical issues forced me to leave school. I'm still young and have so much I want to do. I don't want to end up in a nursing home because I cannot care for myself. I recently was presented with an employment opportunity that suited me, and I was on top of the world. And then I got the news that my physician was going to be changing his practice and no longer prescribing opioids. I would have to seek my own care elsewhere, and the imminent reality of being forced to suddenly taper this medication and navigate the process of referrals to a new physician is overwhelming. Tapering has been devastating to my ability to function, and I can no longer drive and have far more pain and difficulty with ordinary tasks. I have always had a great deal of respect for evidence-based medicine and understanding the mechanism of how something works instead of simply knowing it is effective. However, throughout the history of medicine, the whys have often remained elusive. I have been very fortunate to enjoy sustained efficiency of my opioid regime for years, with the result of not just moderate pain control, but much more significant and meaningful improvements in my physical functioning. The physicians I've contacted, at least 15 so far, are good and compassionate primary care, PM&R, neurology, or pain medicine specialists. However, they have cited the current regulatory climate as their reason for avoiding controlled substance prescriptions or keeping their dosing conservative. No one seems willing to take on my challenge and help me continue my quality of life and build my future because of the way my dosing regime looks on paper. I have a documented good compliance history through PDMP and UDT monitoring. I have not engaged in aberrant medication behaviors. I have encountered no intolerable side effects, have normal endocrine labs, and remain alert and motivated. I have no concurrent mood disorders. I use other non-medicine ways to cope with the stress that my body is under. I am a positive and optimistic person that wants to do some good in my community, and I do not want to be punished and put in this position simply because others have made poor choices regarding their controlled substances. I hope someone will be willing to take a chance on me. It is for these reasons that I am respectfully asking for your assistance locating a physician who can treat me and my unique case and allow me to have the quality of life and independence I've had the past 9 years. I am hoping your association's advocacy efforts can extend to a patient in need. I'm willing to travel and do whatever necessary to make my healthcare team comfortable that my regime is medically necessary, safe, and that I am upholding my responsibilities as a patient. Thank you in advance for your consideration of my situation and any guidance you can provide. End quote. Anne wrote a comment too on this letter that I have to share with you. She wrote, I wrote this letter when I tried to find a doctor in 2015. No reply. I'm told they joked about my letter though. Went to each person's email plus the office. These doctors also sit on the board of medical examiners. Was lucky enough to see Dr. Tennant until he announced his retirement 2 weeks ago. Patients have meds through June. Seeing as the clinic saw patients the first week of the month, most patients will be due for their meds. Same week, everyone else is celebrating the 4th of July. He had 150 compliant high-dose patients who no one else would see because of their high dose. I want to thank Anne Fuqua'S for sharing her story and her experiences, and it is my prayer, and I hope it is your prayers, that her situation comes to a satisfactory conclusion for her, as for all of us. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Bye-bye.